They say love makes you blind, but I believe it simply renders you foolish. 6 years of marriage, built upon promises we swore we'd never break. Or so I thought. Lila and I were both all too familiar with betrayal. I had been burned by my first wife, and she had been discarded by her ex, Hank, for someone younger. When we met, we found a shared understanding, a vow that honesty would be the only way forward. We had seen enough lies to know we didn't want them in our own story. So we committed to this life together, building a routine. I'll admit, I grew comfortable. This was us, after all. No secrets, no lies, just a quiet mutual understanding. Today, however, was our 6th anniversary. We had planned a larger celebration with friends for the weekend, but tonight it was just the two of us. A quiet dinner at home, nothing extravagant, just a chance to mark the years we had weathered. That morning, over breakfast, Lila mentioned she would be going to her tennis lesson later in the day and running a few errands before coming home for our evening together. I nodded along, feeling unexpectedly sentimental. After 6 years, I still wanted to make her happy. I decided right then that I would leave work a little early, pick up a nice bottle of wine, and maybe even help her with dinner. A quiet night, just the two of us, perhaps a toast to the next 6 years. Romantic, right? She smiled as she saw me off, coffee mug in hand, looking every bit the way she had back when we first started this whole thing. It felt good, like maybe this was still something solid. Looking back now, it's almost hard to pinpoint the exact moment the gut feeling started to creep in. But as I walked out the door that morning, all I had on my mind was the surprise I had planned for her. A small gesture, a reflection of the years we had shared. I had no idea what kind of surprise she had in store for me. Later that afternoon, as I wrapped up things at the office, I thought about the plan I had mentally laid out that morning. The wine, the quiet dinner, a little toast. It all seemed simple enough, but as the day wore on, a funny feeling started to nag at me. I couldn't shake it. It wasn't anything concrete, just that subtle sense, like a tap on the shoulder from my instincts, telling me something was off. So, for no particular reason, I opened the live feed from our home security camera, telling myself I just wanted to catch her heading out for tennis, to time my surprise just right. But when the screen loaded, my stomach did a quick dive. The kind you feel when you know you're seeing something you shouldn't be. There was Lila, all right, but instead of her usual tennis gear, she was stepping out in a red dress I hadn't seen in years, form-fitting heels, and flawless makeup. I hadn't realized she even had that dress in the closet anymore, certainly not something you'd throw on for tennis or errands. My mind tried to talk itself down. Maybe she had a reason, maybe there was a special gathering after tennis I didn't know about. But none of it lined up. All I knew was that dress wasn't for tennis, and if she was wearing it, then her plans for the day were about as far from our anniversary as you could get. Curiosity wasn't cutting it anymore. Now, it was suspicion. I opened up the app for the GPS tracker I had set up on her car years back when I had insisted it was just for security. I had hardly ever used it, practically forgotten about it, really. But today, it felt like it had been waiting for me. I watched the little dot marking her location shift from our neighborhood to the downtown area, not near any tennis courts or grocery stores. And there, in that moment, every inch of me just knew I had to see where she was going. My work was done for the day anyway, so I grabbed my keys and headed out. By the time I reached the area her car was parked, it was outside Fellini's, an upscale restaurant that used to mean something to us. It was the kind of place reserved for anniversaries, birthdays, moments you wanted to remember. I parked a little way up the street, leaning forward in my seat as she stepped out of her car and walked toward the entrance. And that's when I saw him. Hank, standing right at the door, as if he had been waiting there all his life. The same guy who had left her for someone younger, someone apparently more exciting. My mind went blank for a moment, staring as she walked up to him, kissed him on the cheek, and settled in close. Her arm slipping around his waist as they walked into the restaurant together. And just like that, every ounce of optimism or doubt I had evaporated. I stayed in my car for a minute, stunned, the anger and hurt settling in a little deeper with each second. Then, still feeling that odd, detached calm, I picked up my phone, opened the camera, and began snapping pictures. A hug, a smile, a kiss. It was all there, plain as day, every frame of her betrayal saved right there in my phone. One part of me felt numb. The other part, the one that still remembered every lie I had been told in my last marriage, was already figuring out my next steps. This wasn't going to end the way she thought. Sitting in my car, phone in hand, I stared at the screen, flipping through the photos I had just taken. Each shot felt like another stab to the gut. There was Lila, all smiles, leaning close to Hank, the ex she had sworn she was over a long time ago. And not just close, affectionate, happy, like he was someone she cared about. There was no mistaking it. That kiss, the way she held his arm, the look in her eyes. She was all in, and whatever she told herself to justify it didn't matter. It was all there, in black and white. I'd had enough. After a few minutes, I put my phone down. The initial shock was giving way to a cold, quiet resolve. I had seen something like this before once upon a time, and if there was one thing I had learned, it was to act fast. The last thing I wanted was to hear excuses, stammering apologies, or her trying to explain what I already knew. But I'd be lying if I said part of me didn't feel almost numb. You think you know someone, think you're immune to all of it, and then this. A kiss, a smile, an evening out with an ex. I didn't want to confront her here in public, where she would have the chance to turn it into some dramatic scene. No, that was for later, somewhere she wouldn't be able to wriggle out of it, somewhere I could lay it all out. I looked at the clock. A little after 6. I decided to head back to the office, collect my thoughts. It was an oddly satisfying decision, like I was calmly working through the last steps of a problem I had already solved. So, I put the car in drive and headed back. As I sat at my desk, staring at my computer, I reached for my phone again. I scrolled past the photos, opening my contacts, and found the number I hadn't thought about in a while. My lawyer. The same one who had handled my last divorce. The irony wasn't lost on me. I pressed call, and after a couple of rings, he picked up. "Jack," he said, sounding mildly surprised. "What can I do for you?" "I'm going to need papers," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "Tonight, if possible." There was a pause on the other end, just a beat, as if he knew this conversation was inevitable. "Consider it done," he replied smoothly. "I'll have everything ready by the evening. I assume you're in a hurry." I gave a half laugh, one that sounded as bitter as I felt. By the time I left the office, everything was in motion. The plan was set. My lawyer had everything he needed, and I felt an odd sense of calm, knowing it would be done before she even saw it coming. I headed home, pulling into the driveway, feeling as detached as ever. I knew she'd be there, waiting, maybe even with a smile, as if she hadn't just spent the evening wrapped around her ex, the one she had spent hours planning to lie to me about. Well, now it was my turn to surprise her. When I pulled into the driveway that evening, the house looked as peaceful as ever, almost picture perfect. And part of me wished I could just walk inside, forget what I'd seen, and pretend this was still our life. But I wasn't in the mood for pretending, not anymore. I stepped inside, and there she was, in the kitchen, humming quietly as she set the table. She'd put out candles, our best plates, even the wine glasses we only used on special occasions. And just like that, any trace of doubt I might have had vanished. She was going all out, putting on a show like she'd actually planned to celebrate our anniversary together. She looked up, her eyes lighting up when she saw me. "You're home. Dinner's almost ready," she said with a warm smile, like nothing at all was out of the ordinary. I forced a smile back, feeling completely detached, watching her the way you might watch a stranger. Every movement she made looked rehearsed, from the way she set down the silverware to the casual kiss she planted on my cheek. This wasn't the woman I thought I'd married. This was someone playing a role, and I was just the audience. Dinner was quiet at first, a few simple exchanges about our day, nothing out of place. But it felt like she could sense something was off. She kept glancing at me, maybe expecting me to bring up our anniversary, say something romantic. But all I could think about was the image of her with Hank, every laugh, every touch, replaying in my mind. Finally, she put down her fork and looked at me, a little too closely. "You seem distant tonight. Are you okay? I took a sip of my wine, letting the silence hang there just a little too long. I'm fine, I said, keeping my voice even. It's just been a busy day. She gave a small, understanding smile. Well, I'm glad we can relax tonight. I've been looking forward to this. And that was all I could take. I put down my glass, sat back, and let her words sink in for a moment. Then I leaned forward, watching her carefully. So, how was your day, Lila? Lila looked momentarily caught off guard, but she recovered quickly. Oh, you know, the usual. Gym, some grocery shopping, nothing exciting, she said. Her tone casual, as if she'd been running errands instead of draping herself all over Hank. I could feel my jaw tighten, and it took everything in me to stay calm, to let her keep going with the charade. I nodded slowly. Grocery shopping, huh? And the gym? Yes, she said, looking at me with that easy smile, like she had nothing to hide. I wanted everything to be perfect for tonight. Perfect, right? I could feel the anger starting to rise, and I forced myself to breathe, to let her finish this act she was putting on. Funny, I said finally, pulling my phone out of my pocket. Because that's not what I saw. Her smile faltered, just a fraction, but it was enough. I turned my phone toward her, showing her the first photo, the one of her and Hank at Fellini's, her arm around him, his hand on her waist. The color drained from her face, and for a split second, she looked like a stranger. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. She knew I'd seen everything. Lila stared at the photo, her face going pale, the smile wiped clean off her lips. Her mouth opened and closed like she was searching for the right words, but kept coming up empty. The silence stretched on, thick and heavy, and I could see her mind racing, working out what to say or how to dig herself out of this mess. Jack, she finally managed, her voice shaky. I can explain. It was just lunch with Hank. I didn't want to upset you, so I didn't tell you. I laughed, a bitter, humorless laugh that surprised even me. Lunch? I repeated. Is that what you call it? Because from where I was sitting, it looked a whole lot more like a date. She swallowed, glancing away, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. Jack, I swear it was nothing. Hank, he just wanted to catch up. And I thought, why not? I was curious, I guess. Curious? I repeated, feeling the anger creep into my voice despite myself. So curious that you felt the need to put on a dress I haven't seen in years, kiss him, and lean into him like he was someone you cared about? She winced, a flash of panic in her eyes. It's not what you think. I didn't want to hurt you. It didn't mean anything. She reached for my hand across the table, but I pulled back, the gesture feeling like a cruel joke. Didn't mean anything? I shook my head, unable to believe she thought that line would work on me. You seriously expect me to believe that? Her shoulder slumped, and I could see the desperation on her face. Jack, I just wanted him to see how far I'd come, she said, her voice barely a whisper. That's all I wanted him to see, what he missed out on. It was stupid, I know. I don't know. I got caught up in it. Caught up in it, I repeated, letting the words hang in the air. How many times have you met with him, Lila? Was this just a one-time thing, or is this part of your new routine? Her eyes widened, and she shook her head quickly. No, I swear it was just this once. I promise you. Promises. I was done with promises. Well, if it was just this once, you won't mind showing me your phone, right? She froze, her face going even paler, if that was possible. Her hands clutched her phone so tightly, her knuckles turned white. Jack, come on. My phone, that's private. Private? I leaned back, watching her with that same detached calm that had carried me through the day. You mean like your lunch with Hank? Don't worry, Lila. If there's nothing to hide, this should be easy. Show me your messages. She didn't move, her gaze dropping to the floor, and her grip on her phone didn't loosen. And in that moment, I knew everything I needed to know. I didn't need to see those messages. Her silence told me everything. Slowly, I stood up, slipping my phone back into my pocket. You don't need to worry about it, Lila. I said, my voice cold and distant. I've already got everything I need. The look on her face was somewhere between guilt and fear, like she knew this was the end of the line. She opened her mouth to say something, maybe another excuse, another plea. But I held up a hand to stop her. I wasn't interested in anything else she had to say. I turned and headed for the living room, leaving Lila sitting at the table, still clutching her phone like it was her last lifeline. I walked back in, a folder in my hands, and held it out to her. "Here," I said simply. "We're done." She stared at the folder, confused at first, like she didn't understand what she was looking at. Then, slowly, she realized what it was. Her face crumpled, a mix of shock and panic crossing her expression as she opened it and saw the divorce papers staring back at her. "Jack," she whispered, shaking her head. "Please, can we talk about this? I didn't mean for it to go this far. It was a mistake, a stupid mistake." I looked at her, keeping my expression calm, detached. "It might have been a mistake, Lila, but it wasn't a small one. I told myself after my last marriage that I'd never do this again, never tolerate lies and half-truths, no matter the excuse." Tears filled her eyes as she clutched the papers, her hands trembling. "Jack, please don't do this. I can fix this. I was stupid, okay? It was nothing. I don't want to lose you over something like this." I almost laughed, but there was no humor left in it. "It's too late, Lila. If there was even a chance of fixing this, you'd have shown me your phone. You'd have been honest from the start, but you didn't. And now it's over." She opened her mouth to respond, but I didn't want to hear it. I was already done with the explanations, the pleading, the hollow apologies. This was all just noise at this point. "I called my lawyer today," I said, "the same one who handled my first divorce. He didn't miss a beat, said he'd have everything ready by tonight, and here we are. Apparently, they have a whole template for situations just like this." She looked down at the papers, the weight of it finally settling in. Her lips trembled, her expression changing from shock to something closer to defeat. I raised my glass, a half-smile creeping onto my face. "To our anniversary, Lila. May it be unforgettable." And with that, I took a long sip, watching as she sat there, the reality hitting her square in the face. All the lies, the betrayals, every calculated decision she had made. This was what it had all led to. There was no more acting, no more excuses, just the quiet truth sitting heavy in the room. A few months passed, and in that time, I'd managed to put Lila out of my mind for the most part. I hadn't expected to feel this kind of calm, this strange sense of closure, but in the end, maybe it was the only way I could have felt. I'd done my part. I'd kept my word. She was the one who had thrown it all away. It was around this time that I heard, through mutual friends, what had happened with Lila. As it turned out, after I walked away, she had ended up with Hank. Maybe they thought they could pick up where they left off, pretend she hadn't been with me for 6 years, or maybe she had convinced herself he was worth all this chaos. But as usual, old habits die hard. It wasn't long before Lila's name came up in conversation again. This time, though, the story was different. Hank had apparently left her, not for the first time, and certainly not the last. And now, to add insult to injury, Lila was pregnant. They'd moved in together for a while, tried to build something out of what she had destroyed, but Hank had never been the type to stick around for long. When he found out about the baby, he bailed, leaving her alone to deal with the mess. I heard that for a while she tried to track him down, tried to get him to face what they had created together. But true to form, Hank had already moved on to the next thing, vanishing from her life as easily as he had entered it, just like he had done to her before. There was a strange irony to it all. She had destroyed our marriage, thrown away everything we had built together, for someone who wasn't willing to lift a finger when she needed him most. The man she had once loved, the man she had risked everything for, he was nothing but a fleeting moment in her life, and now she was left alone, carrying the weight of it all. From what I heard, she was barely holding it together. The person who had once been so proud, so sure of herself, was now a shadow of what she had been. And as for Hank, he had moved on without a second thought, living his life as if none of it had ever happened. I'll admit, I felt a strange satisfaction hearing the story unfold. Not happiness exactly. There's nothing enjoyable about watching someone else suffer. But it was justice, plain and simple. The natural consequence of the choices she had made. I was just relieved to be free from it all. I hadn't wanted revenge, hadn't wanted to see her suffer. All I had wanted was to be done with the lies, the broken promises, the endless cycle of betrayal. And now, finally, I had that. Months later, I found myself living a life I hadn't anticipated. It was quiet, simpler, without the constant push and pull of trust, suspicion, and we're in this together promises. I had shed the baggage of our broken vows and moved on, piece by piece, until the whole ordeal felt like a distant memory. But memories have a way of lingering, and I still heard bits and pieces about Lila from our mutual friends. Her life, it seemed, was not unfolding in the grand, exciting way she had envisioned. The short-lived fling with Hank had left her alone, and from what I gathered, she was now scrambling to make sense of it all. She was still as stubborn as ever, refusing to see how her choices had led her here. And Hank, he was as predictable as ever, chasing the next thrill with no interest in looking back. Hearing all this didn't bring me any real joy, but it did make me feel certain that walking away was the best decision I had made in years. They say karma catches up with everyone, but sometimes people do an excellent job of sabotaging their lives all on their own. My life, by contrast, had taken a turn for the better, without the weight of betrayal hanging over me. I was able to focus on the things that mattered, finding peace, learning to trust myself again, and appreciating a life free from lies and half-hearted apologies. It felt almost surreal, but I'd finally found the calm I had been craving. There's a saying that if you sit by the river long enough, you'll see the bodies of your enemies float by. I never thought it applied to me until now. I hadn't gone looking for revenge, but somehow life had handed it to me in its own quiet, almost poetic way. Lila, Hank, the tangled mess they had made of things. It was all behind me, and I could finally look at it with the detached perspective it deserved. If anything, I'd learned a simple truth. Sometimes, the best revenge is knowing you're better off. I didn't need to do anything to make them suffer. Their choice had done that for them. And me? I'm just moving on, a little colder, a little wiser, and maybe with a touch more irony, because sometimes, life has a funny way of sorting things out without you lifting a finger.